Gentlemen, we have our finest selections from across the globe. Marcus, the sleek agency broker, purred, gesturing to the lineup of 9 impossibly polished, trembling women. Russian ballerinas, Colombian models, all seeking a strong provider. Liam stood in his mud-crusted boots, the scent of pine and wood smoke clinging to his broad shoulders. His piercing blue eyes scanned the 9 terrified porcelain dolls, then shifted to the shadows of the corner. There stood the 10th, plump, flushed, clutching a frayed cardigan, looking like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. She wasn't a model. She was a survivor. Marcus stepped forward, blocking Liam's view. "Ah, she's a clerical error, sir. Let me show you the premium tier." Liam shoved past him, his deep voice echoing off the sterile walls. "Give me the fat one!" The silence that followed Liam's demand was absolute. In the sterile, fluorescent-lit office of Elysian Matches in downtown Seattle, the hum of the air conditioner suddenly sounded like a roaring jet engine. 9 impeccably manicured women blinked in synchronized shock. They were draped in silk and tailored dresses, their waistlines cinched, their smiles practiced and painfully hollow. They had been flown in, groomed, and prepped to cater to the ultra-wealthy men of the Pacific Northwest. And then there was Olivia, standing half a step behind the neat row. Olivia instinctively tightened her grip on her oversized, moth-eaten gray cardigan. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She was 28, possessing a soft, full figure that the cruel fashion industry, and Marcus, the agency director, had relentlessly categorized as undesirable surplus. She hadn't even been meant to be in the viewing room today. She was only here because she had begged for shelter in the agency's back rooms after fleeing her previous life with nothing but the clothes on her back and a duffel bag. Marcus let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh, adjusting his silk tie. "Mr. Stone, please. I understand you mountain men have eccentric tastes, but Olivia is merely part of the maintenance staff. She was just leaving. If you look at Katerina here, she was a gymnast in—" "I don't want a gymnast," Liam interrupted. His voice was a low rumble, the sound of boulders shifting deep underground. He didn't raise his voice, yet the sheer authority in it made Marcus snap his jaw shut. Liam took a slow, deliberate step toward Olivia. He was a towering figure, 6'4" of solid muscle forged by decades of brutal, unforgiving labor in the Cascade Mountains. His beard was thick and dark, streaked with premature silver, and his flannel shirt stretched tight across his chest. He didn't belong in this glass and steel skyscraper. He looked like he could tear the building down with his bare hands. Olivia stared at the tips of his scuffed leather work boots, terrified to look up. If she didn't get a placement today, Marcus was throwing her out. And if she was thrown out, he would find her. The debt collectors, the shadows of a past she had narrowly escaped, were waiting on the pavement 30 stories below. "Look at me," Liam said. It wasn't a request. Trembling, Olivia slowly raised her chin. Her large hazel eyes met his piercing blue ones. She expected disgust. She expected mockery. She had spent her whole life apologizing for taking up space, enduring the sneers of men who wanted women to be small, fragile, and easily broken. But Liam wasn't sneering. His gaze swept over the soft curve of her jaw, the fullness of her hips hidden beneath the ugly cardigan, and the terrified, cornered animal look in her eyes. He didn't see a flaw. He saw weight. He saw substance. He saw a woman who wouldn't blow away in the first winter storm. "She's the one," Liam stated, not breaking eye contact with Olivia. "Mr. Stone, be reasonable," Marcus hissed, his professional veneer cracking. "You paid the premium fee, $50,000. You can have perfection. Olivia is, well, look at her. She's overweight. She has no refinement. She's a liability." Liam finally tore his eyes away from Olivia and leveled a glare at the broker that made the smaller man physically recoil. "I paid $50,000 for a wife, Marcus, not a doll." Liam reached into his heavy canvas jacket, pulled out a thick envelope of cashier's checks, and threw it onto the glass desk. "I want a woman who looks like she's actually eaten a meal. I want a woman who won't freeze to death when the generator blows in January. Draft the paperwork, now." Olivia felt the blood drain from her face. She was being bought. The crude, blunt way he had called her, the fat one, still stung her cheeks, a humiliating brand in front of the beautiful women. Yet, beneath the stinging shame, a tiny, desperate spark of relief ignited. He had chosen her. As Marcus scrambled to gather the checks and print the binding contracts, Liam stepped closer to Olivia. The scent of him, wood chips, cold air, and something deeply primal, washed over her. "Get your things," Liam murmured, his voice dropping to a register only she could hear. "We have a long drive ahead of us." "Why?" The word slipped from Olivia's lips before she could stop it. Her voice was a fragile whisper. "Why me?" Liam looked down at her, his jaw tightening. For a fleeting second, the terrifying mountain man looked almost vulnerable. "Because you're the only one in this room who looks like you know how to survive." The transition from the polished glass of the city to the untamed wilderness was as jarring as a physical blow. Olivia sat rigid in the passenger seat of Liam's battered 1978 Ford F250, her knuckles white as she gripped the vinyl armrest. For the first 2 hours, the only sound was the roar of the engine and the rhythmic thumping of the bald tires on the wet highway. Seattle had faded into a gray blur in the rear-view mirror, replaced by the towering, claustrophobic evergreens of the Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest. Olivia stared out the window, her mind racing. She was legally bound to this stranger. The paperwork had been a blur of signatures and initials, finalizing a contract that promised her protection and a home in exchange for what? Companionship? Servitude? She didn't dare ask. She covertly shifted her gaze to study Liam. His massive hands rested lightly on the steering wheel, his profile sharp and unyielding against the fading afternoon light. He hadn't spoken a word since they left the agency. His silence was deafening, a heavy blanket that suffocated her. "Give me the fat one." The words echoed in her mind, a cruel loop. Did he buy her as a joke? Was she going to be his workhorse? She knew mountain life was hard. Maybe he just wanted someone big enough to chop wood and haul water, someone he didn't have to pretend to find attractive. The thought made a lump form in her throat. She wrapped her arms around her thick waist, suddenly intensely aware of every roll, every curve that Marcus had deemed a defect. The truck hit a massive pothole, sending a jolt up Olivia's spine. She gasped, her duffel bag sliding off the dashboard and spilling onto the floorboards. Sorry," Liam grunted, finally breaking the silence. He didn't look at her, keeping his eyes glued to the winding, darkening mountain pass. Olivia hurriedly bent down to gather her few belongings. A worn paperback, a hairbrush, and a small, cracked framed photograph of her late mother. As she reached for the frame, her sleeve rode up, exposing her forearm. Liam's peripheral vision caught the movement. He slammed on the brakes so hard the truck fishtailed on the gravel, coming to a shuddering halt near the edge of a steep ravine. Olivia shrieked, pressing her back against the door, her heart exploding in her chest. "This is it," she thought, pure panic seizing her. "He brought me out here to hurt me." But Liam wasn't looking at the ravine. He was staring at her exposed wrist. Under the fading dashboard light, the ugly purple-yellow bruises circling her forearm were starkly visible. The grip marks of a man's hand. The silence in the cab shifted. It was no longer empty. It was pressurized, explosive. Liam's jaw worked, the muscles ticking beneath his beard. He shifted his truck into park, leaving the engine idling. "Who did that?" His voice was dangerously quiet. Olivia quickly yanked her sleeve down, her cheeks burning with shame and terror. "It's nothing. I'm clumsy. I fell." "You don't get handprints from falling, Olivia." He said her name for the first time. It sounded strange coming from him, heavy, deliberate, like an anchor dropping. "Please," she whispered, tears finally welling in her eyes, threatening to spill over. "Please, just drive. It doesn't matter anymore. He can't reach me now." Liam stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. The anger in his eyes wasn't directed at her, but she still shrank back from the sheer heat of it. Slowly, he reached across the cab. Olivia flinched, squeezing her eyes shut, preparing for a strike. Instead, she felt something heavy and warm drape over her shoulders. She opened her eyes. Liam had pulled a thick woolen blanket from the back seat and tucked it around her trembling frame. His massive hand lingered near her shoulder for a fraction of a second before pulling back. "It gets colder the higher we go," he said gruffly, putting the truck back into gear. As the truck lurched forward, continuing its ascent into the darkening mountains, Olivia pulled the wool tight around herself. It smelled like cedar in him. A strange, confusing warmth began to thaw the ice in her chest. He had seen her damage. He had seen her shame, and he hadn't used it against her. "You don't have to be afraid of me," Liam said suddenly, his voice rough, eyes fixed on the road ahead. "I meant what I said in that office. I didn't want a porcelain doll. Dolls break." "And what am I?" Olivia asked softly, the vulnerability slipping out. "You're a woman," Liam replied simply. "And no one is going to put their hands on you ever again. Not while you're on my mountain." Night had fully fallen by the time the truck finally groaned to a halt. Olivia peered through the frosted windshield, her breath pluming in the freezing air of the cab. Through the swirling snow, she saw it. It wasn't a shack or a dilapidated cabin as she had feared. It was a fortress. Built from massive, hand-hewn logs, the structure sat nestled against a sheer rock face, sheltered from the worst of the brutal alpine winds. Warm yellow light spilled from two small windows, cutting through the oppressive darkness of the wilderness. "We're here," Liam said, cutting the engine. The sudden silence of the mountain was absolute, heavier than the silence in the truck. Olivia gathered her duffel bag, her legs stiff and aching as she stepped out into the knee-deep snow. The cold was a physical shock, biting through her thin clothes instantly. Liam was by her side in seconds, effortlessly grabbing her bag with one hand and wrapping his other arm around her shoulders to shield her from the wind, guiding her quickly to the heavy wooden door. He kicked his boots against the frame and pushed the door open, ushering her inside. The heat of the cabin hit her like a physical embrace. The air smelled of wood smoke, roasted coffee, and dried herbs hanging from the rafters. A massive cast-iron stove sat in the center of the open-plan room, radiating intense warmth. The walls were lined with shelves holding rows of mason jars filled with preserved food, and thick animal pelts covered the polished hardwood floor. It was rugged, masculine, and entirely isolated from the rest of the world. Olivia stood awkwardly in the center of the room, water pooling around her boots as the snow melted off her clothes. She felt enormous and clumsy in the pristine, well-kept space. Liam shrugged off his heavy coat, hanging it on a peg by the door. "Take your boots off. Stand by the fire." She did as she was told, padding in her damp socks toward the stove. She kept her eyes averted, her mind racing to the inevitable next step. The contract, the marriage, the payment. Where do you want me?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. She looked toward the large king-sized bed visible in the alcove on the far side of the room. It was covered in a thick quilt. Liam followed her gaze, and a complex emotion flickered across his face. Annoyance, maybe, or regret. He walked past her, down a short hallway she hadn't noticed, and pushed open a solid oak door. "In here," he called out. Olivia tentatively approached. She peered inside the room. It was smaller than the main area, but incredibly cozy. There was a full-sized bed with a thick down comforter, a small dresser, a reading lamp, and a window looking out into the snow-draped pines. But what caught Olivia's eye, what made her breath hitch in her throat, was the door itself. On the inside of the door, mounted securely to the solid wood, was a heavy, wrought-iron sliding bolt. She turned to look at Liam, her eyes wide with confusion. I don't understand." Liam leaned against the door frame, his massive frame filling the space. "You've been running, Olivia. I don't know from who and I don't know why, but I know a hunted animal when I see one." He nodded toward the heavy lock. "That's for you. You lock it at night. You don't open it unless you want to. I will never cross that threshold without your permission." Olivia stared at him, her mouth slightly open. This didn't make sense. "But the contract. You paid for a wife." "I paid to get you out of that room," Liam corrected, his voice turning hard. I paid because that slick bastard Marcus was going to throw you to the wolves. So why me? She demanded, a sudden flare of frustration cutting through her fear. Why did you call me the fat one? Why humiliate me if you were just trying to save me? Liam closed his eyes for a brief moment, a deep sigh escaping his chest. When he opened them, the icy blue was softer, filled with a haunting sorrow. Because if I asked for the terrified girl in the oversized sweater, Marcus would have smelled blood. He would have doubled the price, or worse, refused to sell the contract to keep you under his thumb. I had to speak his language. I had to make it sound like I was buying livestock. He pushed himself off the door frame, stepping back to give her space. I'm a coarse man, Olivia. I live in the dirt and the snow. I don't know how to speak softly, but I know how to protect what's mine. He turned toward the kitchen area. There's stew on the stove. Eat as much as you want. Lock the door when you're done. Olivia stood in the doorway of her new sanctuary, her hands trembling as she reached out to trace the cold iron of the lock. For the first time in years, she felt a strange, terrifying sensation blooming in her chest. She felt safe. But as she watched Liam's broad back as he stirred the pot on the stove, she realized something else. He was just as isolated, and perhaps just as broken, as she was. Olivia awoke to the sound of rhythmic, echoing cracks. For a terrifying, disorienting second, she thought she was back in Seattle, and David was pounding on the apartment door. She bolted upright, her heart seizing, her eyes darting wildly in the dim morning light. But then her gaze landed on the heavy wrought iron bolt, still securely thrown across the solid oak door. She exhaled a shaky breath, the tension slowly draining from her shoulders. She wasn't in the city. She was thousands of feet above sea level, in a fortress built of timber and stone. And the sound wasn't a threat. It was the steady, unrelenting thwack of an axe biting into wood. Pushing off the heavy down comforter, Olivia braced herself for the cold. The air in the bedroom was brisk, though not freezing. She slipped into her jeans and the worn gray cardigan, her armor, and cautiously slid the iron bolt back. The click was loud in the quiet cabin, a definitive sound of a boundary being lowered by choice. The main living area was empty, bathed in the pale blue-gray light of an alpine dawn. The cast-iron stove was radiating a steady, comforting heat, clearly stoked hours ago. Through the frost-rimmed window, Olivia saw Liam. He was in the yard, stripped down to a thermal Henley despite the freezing temperature, his breath billowing in thick white clouds. He raised a massive splitting maul high above his head, the muscles in his back and shoulders bunching like coiled steel, before bringing it down with devastating force. A massive round of oak splintered perfectly in two. He didn't pause, didn't hesitate. He worked with the relentless efficiency of a machine designed for survival. Olivia watched him for a long time, wrapping her arms around her waist. In the city, men had made her feel large, cumbersome, and intensely self-conscious of every inch of her frame. But watching Liam conquer the brutal, unforgiving landscape, she realized something profound. Out here, fragility was a death sentence. The delicate porcelain women in that lineup would have frozen to death or shattered under the psychological weight of the isolation. He didn't buy me to humiliate me, she thought, the realization settling deep in her bones. He bought me because he saw someone who wouldn't break. Determined not to be a useless burden, Olivia turned her attention to the kitchen. It was utilitarian, but fully stocked. She found farm eggs, thick-cut bacon, a sack of flour, and strong coffee. By the time the back door groaned open an hour later, the cabin was filled with the rich, heavy scent of a lumberjack's breakfast. Liam stepped inside, stamping his snow-caked boots. He stopped dead in his tracks, his broad chest heaving slightly, his eyes locked on the table. A steaming plate of eggs, crispy bacon, and thick, unevenly cut biscuits sat waiting. Olivia stood by the counter, gripping a dish towel. I didn't know how you liked your eggs. I hope over easy is fine. Liam slowly took off his gloves, his blue eyes shifting from the food to her. There was a guarded wariness in his posture, like a wild animal unused to being fed. You didn't have to do this. You're not my maid. I know, Olivia said, her voice steadier than she felt. But I'm not a guest either. You paid a lot of money to bring me here, Liam. I intend to earn my keep. He stepped closer, towering over the small dining table. I didn't buy a servant, Olivia. I bought a wife. There's a difference. And what is the difference to you? She challenged, surprising herself with her own boldness. Liam pulled out a chair, the wood scraping loudly against the floorboards. He sat down, picking up a fork. He took a bite of the eggs, then a piece of the bacon. He chewed slowly, methodically. The difference, Liam said, his voice a low rumble, is that a servant works because they are forced to. A partner works because they want the house to stand. You don't owe me a debt for getting you out of that room. You only owe the mountain your respect. He took another bite. The biscuits are good. A tiny, involuntary smile touched Olivia's lips. It was the first time she had smiled in over a year. As she sat across from him with her own plate, the silence between them was no longer terrifying. It was the quiet, tentative truce of two bruised people figuring out how to share the same space. By the end of their second week, the mountain decided to test them. The sky turned the color of a bruised plum early in the afternoon, and the barometric pressure dropped so fast it made Olivia's ears pop. By nightfall, the blizzard hit. The wind didn't just blow. It screamed, battering the thick log walls with the force of a freight train. Olivia huddled on the large leather sofa in the center of the room, her knees pulled to her chest. She hated storms. She hated the feeling of being trapped. In her old life, a closed door and bad weather usually meant David was drinking, and there was nowhere to run. Suddenly, with a violent shudder, the cabin plunged into absolute darkness. The generator had failed. The abrupt loss of light triggered a visceral, suffocating panic in Olivia. Her breath hitched, her lungs suddenly refusing to expand. In the pitch black, she wasn't 28 anymore. She was back in that locked closet in Seattle, listening to David's heavy footsteps pacing outside the door. "Liam!" she gasped out, her voice a thin, panicked squeak. She stood up blindly, her hands outstretched, desperate to find a wall, a light, anything. Her foot caught the edge of the heavy coffee table. She stumbled, her hip crashing into a side table. There was a loud crash, followed by the terrifying sound of glass shattering across the floorboards. She froze. The sound of breaking glass, the ultimate trigger. He's going to hit me. I broke something. He's going to hurt me. Olivia dropped to her knees, curling into a tight, trembling ball, throwing her arms over her head to protect her face. Tears streamed down her cheeks, her breathing erratic and shallow. "I'm sorry," she whimpered into the darkness. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Please." "Olivia." The voice was deep, steady, and incredibly close. The soft scrape of a match echoed, and a warm, golden glow bloomed in the dark. Liam stood a few feet away, holding a lit kerosene lantern. He didn't look angry. He looked devastated. He slowly set the lantern on the kitchen counter, illuminating the shattered remains of a glass pitcher on the floor. He didn't step toward her right away. He knew better than to corner a panicked animal. "You're safe," Liam said, his voice dropping to a soothing, gravelly murmur. "You're on the mountain. It's just a blown fuse in the generator and a broken pitcher. That's all. Nobody is going to hurt you." He slowly knelt down, keeping a respectful distance, ensuring she had a clear path to her bedroom door if she needed to run. "Look at me, Olivia. Look at the light." She slowly lowered her arms, her hazel eyes wide and swimming with tears. She looked at him. His large hands were open and empty, resting on his thighs. He used to throw things," she whispered, the confession tearing out of her chest before she could stop it. "Whenever he got angry, if I dropped something, if I made a mistake, he made me pay for it." Liam's jaw clenched so tight the muscles jumped beneath his beard. The urge to hunt down the man who put that terror in her eyes was a physical ache in his chest. But right now, she didn't need a killer. She needed an anchor. "I have never hit a woman in my life," Liam said, each word deliberate and solemn as an oath. "And I don't care if you smash every piece of glass in this cabin. You are not a target. He reached out, slowly, deliberately, and offered his hand. Not to pull her up, but just offering it. A bridge. Olivia stared at his calloused, scarred hand. Trembling, she reached out and placed her small, soft fingers against his palm. His hand closed around hers, warm and solid. He gently helped her to her feet, steering her away from the broken glass. "Why are you so alone up here, Liam?" she asked softly as he sat her by the stove. The darkness and the storm seemed to strip away all pretense. Liam stared into the iron grate of the stove, the flames reflecting in his eyes. "Because 15 years ago, I didn't respect the mountain. My younger brother and I were logging the North Ridge. I pushed us to work through a storm warning. An avalanche hit." His voice went hollow. "I dug for 10 hours. I found him beneath 6 feet of snow. He had been dead for 9. Olivia gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. "I couldn't save him," Liam whispered, the agony of a decade and a half bleeding into the quiet room. "So I built this place, a fortress where the snow couldn't get in, where the world couldn't take anything else from me." He finally looked at her, his blue eyes piercing her soul. "I protect what's inside these walls, Olivia, with my life. Do you understand?" The storm broke 2 days later, leaving the world buried under 3 feet of pristine, blindingly white powder. The silence of the mountain had returned, but the dynamic inside the cabin had irrevocably shifted. The invisible wall between Liam and Olivia had cracked, replaced by a quiet, fierce understanding. Olivia was at the stove, humming softly as she stirred a pot of chili, when the high-pitched whine of a 2-stroke engine shattered the peace. Liam, who had been oiling his rifle at the table, went perfectly still. His head snapped toward the window. Nobody came up this ridge in the dead of winter unless it was an emergency. "Stay here," Liam commanded, rising smoothly. He didn't grab his coat, but he picked up the rifle, racking a shell into the chamber with a sharp, metallic clack. Olivia's heart leapt into her throat. She crept to the frosty window, peering out as Liam stepped onto the snow-covered porch. A heavy utility snowmobile roared into the clearing, ridden by a man bundled in a neon orange parka. He cut the engine, the sudden silence heavy. The man pulled off his helmet, revealing a red wind-chapped face and a sparse, greasy beard. It was Elias, a supplier from the valley town who occasionally hauled goods up the mountain. "Stone!" Elias shouted, his voice grating and loud. "Hell of a storm! Thought I'd come check on the hermit, see if you froze to death." Liam didn't lower the rifle. He stood on the porch, a towering wall of menace. "I didn't order any supplies, Elias. What are you doing on my ridge?" Elias laughed nervously, dismounting the sled. "Friendly visit, Liam." "Damn. But I hear congratulations are in order. Rumor down at the logging camp is you went to the city and bought yourself a bride." Elias's eyes flicked to the cabin window. Olivia ducked back, but not fast enough. Elias caught a glimpse of her. A nasty, leering grin spread across his face. "Well, well," Elias chuckled, shaking his head. "I gotta be honest, Stone. When they said you bought a mail-order girl, I pictured one of those skinny Russian models. Looks like you got the bargain bin instead. That's a lot of woman to feed through the winter." The air on the porch seemed to freeze completely. Before Elias could blink, Liam stepped off the porch. He moved with a terrifying, explosive speed that a man of his size had no right possessing. In a flash, Liam's massive hand was wrapped around Elias's throat, slamming the supplier backward against the cowling of his own snowmobile. Elias choked, his boots scrambling for purchase in the snow as Liam lifted him an inch off the ground. "You will speak of my wife with respect," Liam snarled, his face inches from Elias's, his voice dropping to a demonic whisper. "Or I will bury you so deep in this snowpack they won't find you until the glaciers melt. Do we have an understanding?" "Yes, yes," Elias gasped, clawing desperately at Liam's iron grip. Liam threw him to the side in disgust. Elias scrambled to his feet, hacking and rubbing his bruised neck. The bravado was completely gone, replaced by genuine terror. "You're crazy, Stone," Elias wheezed, backing toward his handlebars. "I just came to do you a favor, give you a heads up." "A heads up about what?" Liam demanded, His eyes narrowed. Elias swallowed hard. "There's a guy in town. City guy. Slick suit, drives a black SUV. He's been flashing a badge. Private investigator or some crap. He's asking questions at the diner and the supply store." Inside the cabin, Olivia stopped breathing. The spoon slipped from her trembling fingers, clattering loudly to the floor. "He's looking for a woman," Elias continued, his voice shaking. "Got a picture too. Dark hair, hazel eyes, plump. Says she stole something valuable from a prominent businessman in Seattle. He's offering $10,000 to anyone who can point him in the right direction." Elias looked nervously at Liam. "I didn't say nothing, Liam, I swear. But this guy, he's asking about you. He knows you came through town with a woman matching that description." Liam's face was carved from granite. He stared at Elias for a long, agonizing moment. "Get off my mountain, Elias. And if you breathe a word of what you saw here to that suit, I'm coming for you." Elias didn't need to be told twice. He yanked the pull cord, revved the engine, and tore out of the clearing as fast as the snowmobile could carry him. Liam stood in the snow, watching the tracks until the sound faded completely. When he finally turned and walked back into the cabin, he found Olivia standing in the center of the room. She was hyperventilating, her face completely drained of blood, clutching her duffel bag. "I have to go," she stammered blindly, panic making her erratic. "I have to leave. If he finds me here, he'll kill me, and he'll kill you for hiding me." Liam walked over to her. He didn't try to touch her, but he stood directly in her path, a mountain she couldn't move around. "Put the bag down, Olivia. You don't understand," she screamed, tears of absolute terror spilling over her cheeks. "It's David. He found me. He's a monster, Liam. He won't stop until I'm dead. I brought this to your door. I'm sorry. I have to run." "I told you," Liam said, his voice ringing with absolute, unshakable authority. "No one is going to put their hands on you ever again, not while you're on my mountain." He reached out and gently but firmly took the straps of the duffel bag from her trembling hands, dropping it to the floor. "Let him come," Liam said softly, his eyes flashing with a dangerous, protective fire. The mountain needs feeding. The cabin, once a warm sanctuary, transformed into a fortress preparing for a siege. Liam moved with a cold, terrifying efficiency. He didn't speak as he bolted heavy iron shutters, custom-forged plates he'd kept stored in the shed, over the ground floor windows. He extinguished the generator, plunging the cabin back into darkness, relying only on the faint, dying embers of the wood stove. Olivia watched him from the shadows, her breath catching in her throat. "Liam, you don't have to do this," she whispered, the guilt gnawing at her stomach. "If he finds me here, he'll destroy your life. I'll just give him what he wants." Liam paused, holding a heavy pump-action shotgun. He rested it on the table and walked over to where she stood trembling by the hearth. "What did you take, Olivia?" Liam asked, his voice low and remarkably calm. "Elias said the PI claimed you stole something valuable. I know you're no thief." Olivia closed her eyes, a tear escaping down her cheek. She reached into the pocket of her oversized cardigan and pulled out a small, metallic flash drive attached to a cheap lanyard. "David is a venture capitalist," she explained, her voice shaking. "But his real money comes from laundering for cartels through shell companies. I found this drive in his safe when he left it open in a drunken rage. It has every offshore account, every transaction, every name. I took it because it was my only insurance. I thought if I hid and he knew I had it, he wouldn't come after me for fear I'd release it to the feds." Liam took the small drive from her trembling fingers. He looked at it, then looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You stole a cartel ledger from a multimillionaire abuser, and you ran into the wilderness with nothing but a sweater and a duffel bag." Olivia looked down, bracing for him to call her stupid. "I didn't have a plan. I just wanted to survive." Slowly, Liam reached out. His large, calloused fingers gently tipped her chin up, forcing her to meet his gaze. There was no anger in his blue eyes, only a profound, overwhelming respect. "You are the bravest woman I have ever met," he murmured. The words hit Olivia like a physical shock. Her entire life, David had told her she was cowardly, fat, lazy, and worthless. But this mountain of a man who fought avalanches and wilderness, was looking at her as if she were a warrior. Liam stepped back, his professional cold demeanor returning. He handed her a heavy, black object. It was a snub-nosed .38 revolver. "It's fully loaded. The safety is off," Liam instructed, wrapping her hands around the cold steel. "You don't aim for the legs. You aim for center mass, but you only use this if he gets past me. And Olivia?" She looked up, her heart hammering against her ribs. "He is not getting past me." Suddenly, a sharp, unnatural snap echoed from the tree line outside. It was the sound of a tripwire snapping, a perimeter alarm Liam had strung up between the pines an hour ago. Liam instantly killed the last ember in the stove with a cup of water. Absolute suffocating darkness swallowed the cabin. "Go to your room," Liam breathed, a ghost in the dark. "Slide the bolt. Do not make a sound." Olivia sat on the floor of her bedroom, her back pressed against the heavy oak door, the iron bolt thrown securely in place. The snub-nosed revolver felt impossibly heavy in her lap. The silence of the cabin was deafening, broken only by the frantic rushing of blood in her own ears. Outside, the wind howled, masking the sound of footsteps. Then, a new sound cut through the freezing night. "Olivia." The voice was muffled by the thick logs, but it sent a spike of pure, paralyzing ice straight into her veins. It was David. He hadn't just sent a private investigator. He had come himself. The arrogance of the man, to track her into the middle of the frozen wilderness, spoke to his obsessive need for control. "I know you're in there, sweetheart," David called out, his voice dripping with faux sweetness. It was the same tone he used right before he locked her in closets or withheld her food. "The PI tracked your pathetic little lumberjack to this ridge. You've caused me a lot of trouble, Liv. But if you come out now and hand over the drive, I promise I won't be angry." Olivia clutched her head, a whimper threatening to escape her lips. She could picture him perfectly. Pristine designer winter coat, perfectly styled hair, his eyes dead and shark-like. Crunch, crunch, footsteps heavily pacing the front porch. "Where is your feral husband anyway?" David taunted, his voice moving toward the front window. "Did he run off? Did he realize what a heavy, useless burden he bought? You really thought some backwoods hick could protect you from me?" Suddenly, a massive, deafening crash shattered the living room window. Despite the iron shutters, David had found a gap or used a heavy tool to break the glass. The screaming, freezing wind rushed into the cabin, rattling Olivia's bedroom door. "I'm coming in, Liv," David yelled, the polite veneer snapping into pure, unhinged rage. "And when I find you, I'm going to make you beg for the closet." She heard the heavy thud of expensive boots hitting the hardwood floor of the main cabin. He was inside. Olivia raised the trembling revolver, aiming it at the center of the oak door. Tears streamed down her face, but a strange, terrifying calm began to wash over her. She remembered Liam splitting the oak in the yard. Out here, fragility is a death sentence. She wasn't fragile. She had survived David for 3 years. She had survived the escape. She had survived the judgment of the world. Outside the door, she heard David ransacking the kitchen, throwing cast-iron pans to the floor. "Where are you, you fat cow?" he screamed. He was getting closer to the hallway. But where was Liam? Had David brought men with him? Had they ambushed Liam outside? Panic flared again, but Olivia clamped down on it. Heavy footsteps stopped directly outside her bedroom door. The doorknob rattled violently. "Locked," David hissed, his voice dropping to a sadistic purr. "Just like old times, Liv. Open the door." He slammed his shoulder against the wood. The heavy oak barely shuddered. The iron bolt held firm. "Open the damn door!" David roared, kicking the wood with brutal force. Olivia stood up. She didn't cower against the wall. She stepped directly in front of the door, her stance wide, the revolver held steady in both hands. She took a deep breath, the cold air filling her lungs. "No," Olivia said. Her voice wasn't a whisper. It was loud, clear, and steady. The kicking stopped. Complete silence reigned on the other side of the door. "What did you say to me?" David asked. genuine shock bleeding through his rage. "I said no, David," Olivia replied, feeling an immense, heavy weight lift off her shoulders with every word. "I am not your property. I am not your victim anymore." Suddenly, a wet, sickening thud echoed from the hallway, followed by a sharp gasp of pain. "You should have listened to her, city boy," a voice rumbled. It was a voice like a boulder shifting underground. Olivia heard the sound of a scuffle, heavy bodies hitting the hardwood, and a sharp, metallic clatter, a gun being kicked away. "Liam!" Olivia screamed, her hand flying to the iron bolt. She yanked it back and threw the door open. The dim moonlight filtering through the broken window illuminated the hallway. David was on his knees, his designer coat torn and stained with snow. Standing over him, a terrifying phantom of the mountain, was Liam. Liam had a bleeding cut above his eyebrow, but his eyes were blazing with an icy, lethal fury. He had one massive hand wrapped in the collar of David's coat, twisting it tight enough to cut off the billionaire's air supply. David clawed uselessly at Liam's iron grip, his face turning a mottled purple. You can't," he wheezed. "Do you know who I am?" "I know exactly what you are," Liam growled. "You're a coward who preys on women because you're too weak to face a real man." Liam casually tossed David backward. The smaller man crashed into the wall, sliding down to the floor, gasping for air. David looked up, his eyes widening in pure terror as he finally comprehended the sheer size and raw power of the man standing over him. "I handled the 2 armed thugs you left by your SUV," Liam stated coldly, wiping a drop of blood from his eye. "Tied them to the steering wheel. Elias radioed the county sheriff when he hit the valley. They're waiting at the bottom of the logging road right now." David's face drained of color. No, I have money. I'll pay you, $1 million, $2 million. Just give me the drive and let me walk away." Liam didn't even look at him. He turned his back on the billionaire and walked over to Olivia. She was still holding the revolver, her hands shaking so hard she could barely keep her grip. Liam gently placed his hands over hers, lowering the weapon. He took it from her and set it on a nearby table. Then, without a word, he pulled her into a fierce, enveloping embrace. Olivia buried her face in his broad chest, the smell of pine, cold air, and gunpowder washing over her. She wrapped her arms around his thick waist, holding on to him as if he were the only solid thing left in the universe. She was crying, but for the first time in her life, they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of profound relief. When the local sheriff arrived an hour later, lights flashing in the snow, David was shivering and broken in the corner, thoroughly terrified of the silent giant who stood watch by the fire. The sheriff took the flash drive, promising to hand it directly to the FBI task force that had been trying to build a case against David for years. As the police SUV slowly disappeared down the snowy mountain road, taking the shadows of her past with it forever, Olivia stood on the porch with Liam. The storm had completely passed. The sky above the Cascades was a brilliant, breathtaking canvas of stars. "The contract," Olivia said softly, her breath pluming in the freezing air. "The one you signed with Marcus. What happens to it now?" Liam looked down at her. The harsh lines of his face had softened entirely. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat, pulled out the folded stamped legal document, and without hesitation, tossed it into the burning wood stove inside the cabin. "It's ash," Liam said. "I don't want a purchased wife, Olivia." Olivia's heart skipped a beat, a sudden, terrifying hollow opening in her chest. "Oh, so, what happens to me?" Liam reached out, gently cupping her soft cheek in his massive, warm hand. His thumb traced the line of her jaw, reverent and tender. "What happens to you, Olivia?" he murmured, leaning down until his forehead rested against hers. "Is whatever you want. The door is unlocked, but if you choose to stay, you stay as my equal, as my partner, because this mountain and this man would be entirely empty without you." Olivia looked into his icy blue eyes, feeling the incredible warmth radiating from him. She wasn't the fat one, the surplus, or the victim. She was home. She stood on her tiptoes, wrapping her arms around his neck, and pressed her lips to his. It was a kiss of fire and frost, a silent vow forged in the wilderness. "I'm staying," she whispered against his lips. I'm exactly where I belong. The transition from brutal alpine winter to mountain spring was not a gentle awakening. It was a violent, roaring resurrection. The snowpack melted with terrifying speed, turning the logging roads into treacherous rivers of brown mud and snapping the frozen creeks into violent, rushing torrents. It had been 4 months since David was taken away in the back of a sheriff's cruiser. 4 months since the heavy iron bolt on Olivia's bedroom door had been slid back and never used again. Olivia stood on the porch, a steaming mug of black coffee in her hands. She was breathing in the sharp, pine-scented air, her face turned toward the pale morning sun. She was wearing one of Liam's old flannel shirts, the sleeves rolled up past her elbows, and worn denim jeans tucked into heavy leather work boots. The moth-eaten gray cardigan, her former armor, had been repurposed as a bed for the stray hound dog Liam had brought back from the valley town 3 weeks ago. She had changed. The terrified, shrinking woman who had stood in the lineup at Elysian matches was gone. Her soft curves remained, but they were no longer something she tried to hide. Her arms had definition from chopping kindling and hauling water. The pale, bruised skin had been replaced by a healthy, ruddy flush, kissed by the wind and the sun. More importantly, the haunted look in her hazel eyes had vanished. Heavy, familiar footsteps thumped on the wooden planks behind her. 2 massive arms wrapped around her waist from behind, pulling her back against a broad, solid chest. Liam buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling deeply. His beard tickled her skin, making her shiver with a sudden, electric warmth. You're up early, Liam murmured, his voice a low rumble against her collarbone. Listening to the mountain, Olivia smiled, leaning her weight into him. It was a simple act of trust that still, even months later, felt like a miracle. In her past life, a man's touch from behind meant she was about to be shoved. Now it meant she was anchored. The North Ridge Road is completely washed out, Liam noted, his gaze scanning the tree line. Which means we're cut off from town for at least another 2 weeks until the mud solidifies. Are we low on anything? Flour, coffee, and patience, Liam teased gruffly, turning her in his arms. He looked down at her, his icy blue eyes entirely soft, filled with a raw, unguarded devotion that still took her breath away. He reached up, tucking a stray lock of dark hair behind her ear. His calloused thumb brushed against her cheekbone. He didn't just love her, he worshipped her. In the quiet, fire-lit nights they shared in the massive king-sized bed, Liam had shown her a kind of intimacy she had never known existed. He treated her body like a holy sanctuary, taking his time, ensuring she knew that every inch of her softness, her weight, her strength, was exactly what he craved. He had spent months undoing the psychological damage David had inflicted, replacing her shame with a fierce, burning confidence. I have to go clear the widowmakers on the eastern slope today, Liam said, his tone shifting back to the practical realities of mountain life. The storms weakened a lot of the old pines. If they fall across the trail, we won't be able to get the truck out even when the mud dries. Olivia frowned, a flicker of concern crossing her features. Widowmakers, massive, dead branches caught high in the canopy that could fall without warning, were notoriously dangerous. Take the radio and moose, she commanded, nodding toward the hound sleeping inside by the stove. Liam chuckled, a deep, rumbling sound. Yes, ma'am, I'll be back by sundown. I've got a venison roast marinating for dinner. He leaned down and kissed her. It was slow, deep, and thoroughly possessive. When he pulled away, Olivia's pulse was hammering. Be careful, Liam, she called out as he grabbed his chainsaw and headed toward the tree line. He didn't look back, just raised a massive hand in acknowledgement. Olivia watched until his broad shoulders disappeared into the dense, green shadows of the forest, an inexplicable knot of unease tightening in her stomach. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the sky turned a treacherous, bruised purple. A freak spring squall was rolling in over the Cascades. The wind picked up, howling through the canyons and shaking the cabin's heavy timbers. Olivia was in the kitchen, kneading a fresh batch of bread dough, when the radio crackled on the counter. It was just a burst of static, followed by a sharp, whining squeal. She stopped, wiping her flour-covered hands on her apron. She walked over and pressed the transmit button. "Liam, you copy, over." Static. "Liam, there's a squall coming in. The pressure is dropping fast. You should head back. Over." Nothing but the crackle of dead air. Olivia's heart gave a sudden, hard thump. The radio range extended for 5 miles. He shouldn't be out of range on the eastern slope. Unless the radio was broken or dropped. She walked to the window. The wind was whipping the pines into a frenzy. Then, faintly, carrying over the howl of the wind, she heard it. Crack, boom! It wasn't thunder. It was the sharp, unmistakable crack of a high-powered rifle echoing from the east. It was a single shot. Then, a minute later, a second. Liam wasn't hunting. You didn't fire spaced, rhythmic shots unless you were signaling. 3 shots meant distress. She waited, her breath suspended in her throat. 2 minutes passed. Then, the 3rd shot echoed over the ridge.